of you who are not familiar with the people on stage, I'll just do a sort of an introduction. Disha Malik runs, is currently working with feminist media and vernacular media, which is fantastic. We have Mariam Matthew, who CEO of Manorama Online. It's interesting to actually match what happens with large groups who have radio and television and newspaper, and compare that with startups that are trying to sort of make their own way and see if the revenue models can be learned from each other, or is there a different point of view there. Prasanna Vishwanathan is the CEO of Swarajya and has worked a lot in tech, and we hope that you can teach us some things, teach us some things that we can learn in terms of, I think the most oft-used question here would be how to use the paywalls and how to convince people who arrive at the paywall to actually pay. And of course, these are all publishers, but we must also talk to the platforms. And Facebook is here, Manish Chopra is here. And I know that a lot of self-published journalists or startup journalists have complained about Facebook constantly changing the algo and putting everybody at a disadvantage. And we're going to find out if Facebook has new sort of routes and methods and advice for journalists and publishers on what they can do to make the most of that platform. I think it's a great time to have this conversation. As journalists and publishers and entrepreneurs in the room, everyone knows what the last 2 quarters have been like, and they have not been pretty. Even if we managed somehow to make things look good last year, the last 2 quarters, and specifically June and July, have been hard, I think, on everyone. And everyone's asking this question because on one hand, you want to be able to do the news independently. And perhaps India has never needed that more than today. And on the other hand, the business end of that bargain becomes really difficult, and it's become even more difficult in the last couple of months. So I think the idea here should ideally be for us to learn from each other, because there are, I can see faces in the audience, people who are running their own businesses, who have started stuff that's regional, vernacular, feminist. There are different aspects, and people from larger groups as well. So if we would take this opportunity to learn from each other, we'll have quick conversations on the panel, and then we'll also open this up to a conversation with the audience as well, so we can make it as productive as possible for everyone. Enough from me. I just want to start with the ladies on the panel, if I may, on the idea of smaller range, perhaps focused writing, whether we're talking about writing specifically from the feminist point of view, or I know that there are a lot of people in the audience who are looking at specific, Kovai Post, for example, or Danya's here from the News Minute, Nisha's here, Vasanti's here. All of these guys look at really specific areas. And there's a view right now that large-scale English media is sort of being trumped by regional and specific news. Have you seen that happen, and is it easier to raise money or raise funding on specific news?
It's not easy to raise money, full stop. But I think that, so I would say, when I saw the title of this panel and thinking about alternative revenue streams, I think that the idea of building a business model for media requires a great deal of social and cultural capital. I think that's gendered capital, caste capital, class capital. And I think that as a small hyperlocal, we're located in eastern and southern UP, which is not a big advertising market. It's a very poor market. It has big numbers in terms of mobile penetration and accessibility, but it hasn't got spending power. But being located over there and having a voice that is not a mainstream media voice, so a voice of women and women on the margins, tribal and Dalit women. It's challenging in terms of what are the available resources for raising money, but it's also been really stimulating and challenging, I think, using those tools and maybe turning them over to create a sustainable feminist business model. And I think that it has really worked for us to be a very specific voice, because what we've been able to do is create a very loyal kind of audience. We had a newspaper for about 15 years. We stopped producing the newspaper to go entirely digital. So now we are video and vernacular. So it doesn't necessarily pay in terms of consumers paying us for the news, but it's a wide and a very loyal audience that's based on that particular voice of that region, because no one else is giving them high quality news in that. So it's been a double-edged sword for us.
So your revenue then is advertising?
So right now it's a variety of stuff. It's commission content. It's some very small, because platforms don't share a lot of the revenue. So it's a very small amount of money from advertising on platforms. It's some amount of collaborations, events. So a lot of the same things that other digital or even mainstream platforms do, but trying to build brand value for a very hyperlocal and feminist voice.
That's really cool. If we could just do one round of applause for the idea of someone doing a feminist voice in Uttar Pradesh, and this, it's so important that different groups of people actually finally get a voice. And I was just reading the surveys that have been put out, one on gender representation in news, in mainstream news, and the other on caste representation in mainstream news. It's quite frankly appalling and depressing where we stand right now in the industry. And perhaps, it's voices like yours that can actually change that. But coming back to the platforms not sharing the money, Manish, Facebook is a huge monster who can afford to share a little more. But tell us, so this has been a regular complaint, right? How the revenue share between Google and the publisher, or Facebook and the publisher. Do you believe that it's a fair revenue share model?
Yes, I do believe it's a fair revenue share model. I think it's fundamentally what has happened in the past, right, has been about changing and evolving our own model and our appeal to our broad user base. And so that's led to innovations, modifications, and impact on distribution. So no doubt about that. We are fully aware, fully conscious about that. And that therefore has made it hard for news publishers to just rely on that one mode of distribution. From a business model perspective, we believe that we are bringing, as we evolve and we focus the user conversation on meaningful social interactions, and we focus that conversation by giving them the right kind of content and the right kind of quality of content that they desire, removing sensationalism, removing clickbait, and removing some of that, it's led to a change, right? Today, I think the monetization methods that we've put out in play, be it monetization through instant articles, be it monetization at subscription approach, be it monetization on news funding, and be it more focus on video and video content through ad break sharing, revenue share. These are the modes that we believe are fundamentally yielding benefit. So, our sponsor here for this session is Business Standard, and they've tried interesting experiment around subscription, which is working for them. And we've opened subscription now for all Indian publishers. The ad breaks model, I think, has started to scale very well. So just to give you some top of the mind numbers, right? And this is the long tail. I'm not talking of the big advertisers here, right? But the people who make about $1,000 equivalent on a monthly basis, that number in the last quarter has gone up 10x. The number of people who make $10,000, which is larger publications, that's also gone up 3x. So I think the right content surfacing to the right consumers who you want to target is really the value that we can bring, right?
I have a problem with that. I'm not quite sure the right content is going to the right people. The problem, I think the good thing about Facebook is, yes, you've got a lot of people, and Google is that you have a larger number of people coming in. But the problem is this, this concept of democratization of content coming in. There is no difference between facts which are correct and which are incorrect. And that's when what happens is that there's so much of stuff out there. I mean, we see this on a regular basis, right? So what happens to credible news? What happens to news voice which is heard, which is needed to be heard and it's not heard? And what happens is that in all this noise that happens, the credible news gets somewhere lost because something or the other, the algorithm black box doesn't seem to work properly, or something other. That's the reason what we are told what happens. And then there is no, there is nothing which happens beyond that. There is no interaction, there is no revenues, there's nothing which goes to say that, okay, this is what it is and this is what it isn't. I mean, I'll tell you a case in point. We had the floods in Kerala last year, and we had so much of rubbish news going on social media. It was very difficult for us to counteract those things. And there was a whole bunch of people who were completely frightened and who didn't know what was happening. And money was going in everywhere. So it was not that you were kind of, doing it to the right person who was giving credible news or anything like that. It was going to all the fake news as well. One. Two, what about brand safety? When all these things happens in this thing, advertisers don't get any brand safety whatsoever.
Let me address these. You've asked a bunch of questions here, right, or a bunch of areas. The first area about surfacing content. As a platform, it's all about personalized content and people following and people valuing the kind of content that is being put out there. And I think...
But sorry, I just need to correct that. Problem is, a lot of people don't know what they are following. They don't even know that what they're following is incorrect stuff out there.
I think I get where you're coming from. As a platform, our accountability fundamentally is first to the user and then to the publisher. And it's very clear, right, that today we are at a stage where we have learned a lot on the platform to be able to create the methods that are there for surfacing or allowing complaints or escalations regarding fake news. So we can deal with.
I just want to ask you this, and I don't know how many of you also noticed, and there was a fair amount of reporting done on this during the Karnataka state elections, and I think it happened again during the union elections. There were these websites that popped up that looked like news websites and were putting out completely outrageous information, and then they disappeared immediately after the election. They were obviously not valid sources.
Even use our logos. So I mean, some of them were just kind of using our logos.
It was like counterfeit news. It was not fake news. It was counterfeit news. Does a platform like yours right now, through the learning that you have achieved, do you have a process at this point to be able to tell the difference between a proper registered news source that is registered, that you can backtrack, you can check, you can find out what the credentials are, and something that has only popped up for a bit? Is there that sort of vetting in the interest of your user that you can do, or that you're doing already?
We shared a lot of the statistics that during the during the election times, right, as to the number of fake accounts or unverified accounts that were taken down automatically even before they came up. And this is a live problem on a platform like ours, no doubt about it. We have we scaled up our entire investment in third-party fact-checking. As a platform, we're not the ones who want to take an opinion on what is published on the platform. That is, you publish. We don't, take an opinion on what you publish, right? Equally. The same thing applies for all publishers, but we do have a method and we do have a clear approach. And the kind of energy and effort that went into how fact-checking was implemented, that fundamentally we feel that we were able to get a significant amount of impact out there. There is no way to, at the scale that the country is and at the scale that this problem is, there's no way to have a perfect solution. But I think we made progress.
Going back to the business of news, when you talk about the news part of it, what happens here is, then if you pump enough money, you will pop up somewhere up there. So it depends on who wants to pump money and who wants to not pump money and get the information out there. So then what happens?
Get the visibility and the views.
get the visibility and the views may not be
But
credible.
let's bring Prasanna into the conversation. You are nodding. Do you also agree that?
No, yeah, I think some interesting perspective, but I think since we're talking about the business of news, based on my personal experience, one of the early business calls that we took actually when we started we are still a fledgling, struggling digital startup, as I would put it, but one of the couple of things that we took a very conscious call is that to be kind of anti-fragile to these behemoths or the big platforms, because the way, the algorithms change, the distribution patterns change. So I think any digital model,
how do you become anti-fragile?
Anti-fragile in the sense, basically it's I think lot of this, glitzy, glamorous terminologies have kind of, vitiated our fundamental understanding. I think basically you need to have strong, engaged audience who you build over a period of time, who are willing to pay for your content actually. Of course, always helps if big platforms help you distribute and discover new audience. So these are the two things that we as an organization, when we started, is that we implemented a paywall, though we were hardly visible, but we knew that ultimately the stable, sustainable, long-term revenue stream is going to be the readership revenue. Of course, one way of readership revenue is subscription. You can try building it on it and deepen the readership revenues. And I think any new startup or anybody who wants to venture into the media space now has to logically think of a business model where they have to assume that the behemoths are not going to essentially there to facilitate or enable you to distribute. So I think that might be a good lesson. Of course, it's a necessity. A virtue we made out of the necessity. But I think that's how we should be looking at it. I would believe actually.
Absolutely, I agree. Actually, goes back to your first question on niche content.
Yes.
At the end of the day, even for Manorama, for example, we've been in 20 years, and we always talked about whether we need to go into all kinds of content or just Kerala content. And we've decided that we are going to stick to niche content. We don't have to be the white noise out there. There are enough people competing in that. And ultimately, in the last 20 years that I've learned in this industry is that good content, people are willing to come to and read and find it, like you said. It has to be kind of independent of the behemoths of the world. It has to be...
Are they willing to pay, though?
That is a question.
So, I would just say kind of that they have been for us incredibly useful in setting up or reaching an audience that maybe we would not have been able to reach, the numbers that we would not have been able to reach. But in terms of sustainability of those independent or smaller publishers, they have not been helpful. That's how.
By they you mean?
By the big platforms.
Okay.
I think see, at the end of the day, the duopoly, which is Facebook and Google, they control 80% of the digital advertising market. Which I think is an integral part of their business model. So in that sense, it's both a competition as well as a collaboration. So it would be, according to me, a bit of a charity to assume that they are there out there to help us. Of course, I think, of course, I don't think so they necessarily indulge in, say, predatory practices, but that's the way.
We'll come to the fact that Facebook is also at this point, pioneering or piloting a model which will help the paywall system for entrepreneurs. But before I come back to that, Nilesh Mishra is here. And it's a voice that all of us recognize, but now you get to see the face as well. Nileshji, thank you for joining us. Gaon Connection and the kind of work that you do, if you'd like to introduce the audience to the work that you're doing, and also talk about how you fund it. Who pays for Gaon Connection? Can you actually get the users to pay? Are there advertisers interested in being part of that? Or are you crowdsourcing the funding? How are you making this happen?
Firstly, I apologize for my delay, and I was telling myself, thank God I don't live in big cities now. I was caught in awful traffic. We started Gaon Connection without knowing what we were starting. I'm a teacher's son. I've been a reporter. I had no sense of how to run a business. I had nobody to tell me, you are doing this and this is stupid. But over 6 to 7 years, I think that has helped because we've committed enough mistakes and uncommitted them to be able to devise a business model which I think will hold us in good stead over the coming years. Gaon Connection is India's biggest rural media platform, which has 6 verticals. We are a video-first company, so we create a lot of video content from across the country for our own platform and for partners. So for a long time, we completely stayed away from any kind of partner content because we do not strictly do paid news. And we had convinced ourselves into believing that even if we were to work with any partner who was paying for the content, it would make us tainted. But over the past few years, I've devised a very simple prism for partner content. Would we have done it anyway? If we're working, like we've done something very successful with Facebook called Mobile Chopal, which was across verticals, or with, say, ITC, or with other big brands. Would we have done that anyway if nobody was paying us? That's a very simple rule we apply. So video content across formats, from the 2-minute to the half-hour format, from community journalists created content to the slow interview, our premium shows, etc. The second vertical is audio, where we're creating audio content for our rural audiences, where it's empowering them. So for example, we're doing a show right now in my voice, which is called Pani Ki Chitti, which is in partnership with the Ministry of Water Resources, where I'm just telling people how to save water. We would have done this anyway. We would have loved to do this anyway. Where we are now creating a new generation of audio artists in multiple languages. We are preparing to now launch audio content in at least 10 languages, where many of these are from my storytelling universe, which has a huge overlap with my Gaon Connection universe. They're fairly like-minded people often. That's the second vertical. The third is our weekly newspaper, with which we started in 2012, December, which bled us because we kidded ourselves into believing that it would be measured. लेकिन जंगल में मोर नाचा किसने देखा, हमसे ज़्यादा अच्छा कोई नहीं जानता. There was a time when we were printing 100,000 copies a week, thinking that, we'll send this data to brands and they would like line up at our doors. Well, they didn't. They didn't, because IRS does not measure there, and whatever number you put, they will, imagine that, okay, you're at least lying 70% all the way, through the way. So we bled and bled on the print piece, and now we've completely made it subscription-based, where we will not be at newsstands, we will only be at schools, colleges, self-help groups, farmers clubs, places which have value for that content, which is created only and only for them. That weekly newspaper is only for them. The fourth vertical is our digital piece. We reach close to 22, 23 million people every month across platforms. Through that, it's growing. It's not fantastic numbers as numbers go these days, because whenever I go to meetings like these, where the digital world has congregated, I feel very defeated. Because impact is today measured only through that Google Analytics sheet. Because that girl who read that piece, that column in Gaon Connection, which said, "Zero figure ki chahat mein kuposhit ho rahi ladkiyan," and she was in Sitapur, in a small village, and read it and thought, this is me, and fixed her diet. Unfortunately, I cannot put her on any Google Analytics sheet or any Excel sheet, so I cannot measure impact in any way for the world that understands and funds impact to be impressive to them. So I feel defeated. I often tell them, don't call me to these meetings. I've said this. I mean, there was a meeting, Omidyar and Gates. I said, don't call me. I go away feeling so awful. Yeah. The fifth vertical is ground activation. We do a lot of small events. We can do this around the country. So whether it is our training for community journalism or a dental camp or something related to menstrual hygiene, we do a lot of this. Again, through the prism of would we have done this anyway? At none of our events will they be told that your teeth can only be cleaned through Colgate. And the last vertical, which will become one of our biggest, is surveys. Today, we've just completed a survey in 19 states with 18,000 respondents right after the new government came to power, telling the government what rural India wants. And as of today, our team, I checked with them, we can do surveys in 25 states. Our next milestone is to be able to reach every district in the country, to be able to hold up a mirror to policymakers, to people who are interested through these scientific surveys. So these 6 things.
Will the results of these surveys be public domain?
Yes. Okay. They're already out. Multiple platforms carried them, and So these 6 things fund our journalism. Even if we do not get a single ad for the next 5 years, we are good. We broke even this year, and we'll end the year, this last financial year, with a profit. And we are hoping that we can now bring up more sort of revenue. All these revenue streams have kicked in. I'm speaking the language of the money-giving world. Okay, all the revenue lines have kicked in, right? So our belief in the fact that these would work has come through. That gives us great confidence. Now we would want to, there's an over-dependence on some verticals which we want to recalibrate, and then hopefully our challenge is that we are in Lucknow. We cannot often attract the best of talent. That's a challenge. So we're now contemplating setting up an office in Delhi. Also content from around the country in new languages, multiple languages. How do we navigate that? So right now we're using content from, say, Nagaland, but it will be carried in only Hindi and English. We just started English. But how do we go to other languages where this can happen? So it's been a long and painful journey. I sort of put in all my personal money, but I think now we'll hopefully stop doing that. We also make our balance sheets public because we believe everybody should know who pays for media.
That's excellent. And I think you've given a lot of people in the room hope. Also, just in this room, we can sort out your regional problem. There are enough people here who can work with you. I want to go back to the big bad platform. Do you feel like the big bad wolf now?
Not at all. Thank you.
But we were talking, before the panel started about this whole paywall and now how Facebook can, and you have started in India, brought content to a point where you can introduce new users, readers, consumers to that content and take the user to the paywall. Tell us how you're doing that.
So I think we're at a stage right now where we believe apart from engaging with all the publishers at all size and levels, we'd love to be in a position where we can enable smart monetization through the innovations that we are doing. Subscription, one very clear area that we're working with. We worked on news funding with some of the people on the stage itself. We work very closely with bringing video and video monetization. Another key area where, as I said, that's good growth happening in that area. We work on branded content, and the branded content partnerships and the branded content piece again works well, and it lands real money in the hands of, in that transaction. And the last but not least, right, is helping through the analytics that we bring, right, with CrowdTangle and FP Analytics, make sure that the right user experiences are being built and being nurtured. One example here is using Facebook groups to be able to bring loyal customers into an environment where they can be given richer, greater, exclusive content, laddering up and trying to find the kind of business models that have worked, right? Find users who engage and who are willing to pay for news. And I think those experiments are really some things that we've scaled and we are engaging there. Our accountability, responsibility, fully agree. As a platform, we carry that, and we carry that to be able to deliver to our users the way they want to consume news. And I think it's very clearly evident that they are wanting more and more news personalized and customized to them. Facebook as a platform with the friends and family and community focus, right, is the place that they're coming to. And I think these methods are the right methods that publishers should adopt rather than just focus on reach and distribution.
Can I say something about what was being discussed when I came in? I think the entire digital content universe today is completely loaded against original content creators. We who painstakingly create content with footwork, with great grit and great sincerity, find ourselves defenseless when we publish a story and within minutes, verbatim, there's a platform I would like to name, Daily Hunt. We were on Daily Hunt. Is there somebody from Daily Hunt here? Hey. Where we complained. We do this, in minutes our stories appears. And the platform shrugged, looked away. It said, hey, we are a platform, we're not responsible. We couldn't do anything, we just left the platform. So I think because in this, this aggregation is a nice word. लेकिन ये जो चोरी चकारी का काम है ना, ये aggregation नहीं है.
One point in addition. Actually, I think the business model that, in terms of the verticals that Nilesh explained, I think that's the only way for the small publishers to go. Basically focus on a niche. It can be an ideological niche, it can be a geographic niche, it can be a thematic niche or some kind of a niche, and deepen different vertical revenue streams, because commodity news as a basic news, I don't think so people are going to pay for it anymore. Like, I mean, unless you're operating in the scale of, say, an NDTV or a Times where you put, like, say, 1,500 URLs a day and you're able to digitally get the ads and monetize. I think if you're a generic news product, I don't think so there is a, especially if you're a small player, I don't think so there is a monetizable model. It's a complete model. So you got to be niche.
Right. So I do want to ask this question, and it's interesting that we've spent a fair amount of time talking about the business of news with no mention whatsoever of television or newspapers. I think that's indicative of where we are right now in this entire media cycle. But in all of these streams of news, the quality that comes from actually having the luxury of putting a reporter, and I'm using the word luxury, of putting a reporter on a story and allowing that reporter weeks, days, I mean, I don't even think any of us can afford of thinking of months anymore, but that's how really good investigative, in-depth journalism used to be done. I can tell you in television we don't have that luxury at all to give a reporter more than 3 days on a story. Now, I want to ask the panel and anyone in the audience who wants to answer this question. You said that the Indian audience would no longer want to pay for news. But is there a possibility that the Indian audience might want to pay for journalism that has actually been done over weeks, over months, where you've come up with a story that nobody else has because you've put in the work?
See, I don't agree that the Indian audience does not want to pay for news. The Indian audience is not yet ready to pay for news and has not been accustomed to pay for news. So this is what happened around the world, right? I mean, whether in the US or in the Europe, when it first started, nobody wanted to pay for news. But once people started realizing that there is a cost to getting good content out there, and good investigative journalism doesn't take, it's not an overnight things. It took time, but people adopted it. Even here, now, for example, people are willing to pay for entertainment content, right? When Netflix came in and the model came in, people were willing to pay for it. You look at, I'm sure you've heard of Bigadan, right, in Tamil Nadu. I mean, they're a small newspaper, but they have been paid from the beginning. They believed in their content, and they put everything behind their paywall, and it helped them. They were, in 100 days, they were profitable. So the thing is that how much of, going back to content, niche content, long-form content, good journalism, we just have to, it's just that I think even as media, houses, whether it's NDTV or television channels. When it came to digital, we never looked at it as a source of revenue. We always looked at it something as a distribution channel. Unfortunately, that luxury is gone now for everybody. So now we need to look at it as a point of revenue. Now, revenue has, everybody explained, it's a whole bunch of things that would come in terms of the business of economics. There has to be a 30-40% share has to come from subscription. There has to be a certain advertising element to it. There will be events, and there'll be a lot of innovative things. We, for example, do digital classifieds, which we thought was a traditional newspaper thing. I think one of the biggest mistakes or biggest things which happened in America was that Craigslist came in and brought everything for free, right? And that hit the newspapers the most without knowing it. At that time, it was the most unglamorous part of the business, and nobody realized that for newspapers, classifieds was very important. That's a business that we decided that we should concentrate on many years ago as part of our digital strategy. So coming back to the business of economics and people wanting to pay for it, it's a matter of getting the right content, getting willing to take the risk that you have this loyal readers. It's not going to be 100 million. It's going to be 5, 10 million. It's the loyal readers who are going to pay for it. And they are willing to pay for this. It's just that you have to get them used to it.
Yes. All right. I want to be able to, yes. Okay. Open this up to the audience. Do we have mic? You do. Okay. Don't hog the mic. This is your event. Pass it down.
Hi. No, I just wanted to take the thing forward about people paying for news. So News Laundry recently did this experiment during the general elections called NL Sena. So the idea was that there are stories during the elections which are not covered from Adivasi and remote areas in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, etc. So we asked people for money, and about 300 odd people supported it, and we were able to completely fund the project, and we were able to cover 16 states, and we were able to give 76 stories out of it. And that happens, and those were very niche stories from areas that TV or newspapers are not visiting, and those journalists spent weeks in that area, and we were able to fund them to do just 2 stories when they spent weeks in, say, Darjeeling or Rajasthan. And we had some excellent reporters like Neha Dikshit, Anumeha Yadav go out in the field and report news during the elections. So people do pay for news when you pitch it in the right way, I feel.
So not only do you hog the mic at your own event, you also
and I promote my own organization. Yes, that's exactly what I do.
All right, you had a question or a point to make.
Recently, someone launched a newspaper, a print-based newspaper in London. It's called Courier. It talks about modern businesses, and that's their primary revenue stream. And it's a weekly. Now they have just come on digital. The other thing which we all are discussing here is like Facebook, Google. They make you believe that their media is limited, so you buy or you go there. But the incremental cost of media has actually become zero now. So we can all build our own audience today with very near zero costs. So that is something, my idea is that we have been only ignoring what is happening in the digital space. As more and more we become aware, we'll be able to figure it out. Probably he has figured it out. Nilesh has figured it out.
Nilesh?
What we're doing is that we're doing 2 things. One is creating a lot of content which has universal emotions. So it is relevant to a far greater section of the audience than we thought it would be. And we are hoping that while people are not paying for our content today, because a lot of our content has shelf life, they might pay for it eventually, when it will still be relevant. And so, for example, a lot of our video shows, we do about 20 video shows, and many of them will soon be available in subtitled French, German, Spanish, Chinese, and many Indian languages. Because one of my favorite stories is about this Shehnai player in Kanpur and his son, which we did as a part of a series called The People Project. And the Shehnai player says, this is my life, I will die playing this. And even if I could not become famous when I was young, I will probably become famous by the time I'm old. And the son says, I'm so proud of my father when I see him perform, and when he's no more, I will not let this die. Now this is not a Shehnai story, it's a father-son story. And if it was a bagpipe player and his son story, which we were watching on our feeds, we would watch it, so why not the other way? So those are the two things, the universal emotion and the fact that we are creating content that will eventually pay, that we are also banking on additionally.
I just wanted to add, I mean, I agree with that. A lot of our most successful videos are also videos which are universal, and they start making money 2 years after they were first published. So, but this question of will the consumer pay and which consumer can pay, and if you do create not universal content, but reportage that's very specific to an area, to a people, and maybe that community cannot pay. And I have two very different experiences. When we published a newspaper, it was always a paid subscription-based newspaper. People paid from 50 paisa to 5 rupees for the newspaper. And still, when we do surveys in Bundelkhand, we have people who will say that there's a credibility to print which digital doesn't have. Because you can get digital, they don't have a lot of faith in the kind of stuff that they consume on platforms, and so they will not pay. So we've done many of these surveys. And so what kind of subscription will work to sustain a hyperlocal kind of specific voice of journalism? Will it then move away? Do you need to move away from that local loyal audience which is consuming you because of the language, because of the region, because of the in-depth investigative reportage? Or do you start depending more and more on the partnerships, on an audience which is urban, which may be international? So basically, then you are thinking about a revenue model. You're kind of schizophrenic in how you're thinking about your audience all the time, which is slightly challenging. So I think that people do pay. People will pay for good content, but who will pay?
Just a point, like, of course, the low-hanging fruit, which is like, you have a fiercely loyal audience, you build, you eventually get them to pay. But where the platforms are going to really come into play and help us is in terms of the scale. Like, for example, the model, let's say we reach 10,000 to 15,000 subscribers. Obviously, then you become a little ambitious and you want to scale it up. In that kind of a thing, you've already picked, because the entire subscription model works on funneling your audience, I think the conversions are like something like 0.01, like probably out of the 1,000 people you distribute the content to, the likelihood of 1 to 2% subscribing is the kind of numbers that we are looking at. So imagine for reaching 10,000 people, what would be the number of audiences that you got to reach? So once you reach a certain scale, then I think the dependence on the platforms become a little more stark in terms of the scale and reaching to a wider audience, actually. So I think till you're small, it's beautiful, but after that, then you got to,
It's not romantic anymore. All right. Yes, Vasanthi. Could we give her a mic, please?
So, Faye, you mentioned that no one's speaking television much, and I think I should fill that gap. I'm Vasanthi Hariprakash, and I'm from Bangalore. Past was in radio, where Faye and I shared some experience on the radio waves of Bangalore before I moved to national television. Now, I was having this conversation with an anchor who was in Bangalore just a few days back on the Siddhartha episode. I was making some sense of this for the show, and he mentioned, when I said that there was a fantastic show that's going on, which is speaking about rural India and what the pani, etc. means, to which he turned around and said, Vasanthi, but the cost-benefit ratio of such great shows simply doesn't work. Now, here is a thing where smaller digital platforms, such as Neelesh's and the others, which I think even on the panel is being spoken about, fills a very, very crucial gap. My own experience, having founded Pickle Jar 3 years back, was that we were on the Lok Sabha elections in the ground in Kerala, Tamil Nadu. I was on a road trip, etc., reporting in Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam. But it was just very difficult, to fund our video cost distribution, both cost and distribution. The distribution particularly is a killer. I really want to ask a panel, as content creators, we can go ahead and do absolutely spectacular, refreshing stories. One of my favorite stories is in Wayanad, where we literally went into the Adivasi camps, and women said about how there is no hospital. There were Muslim women saying that, none of which was covered by the national media. But how do you put this out? One is content creation, that cost. And how are you making it reach to those numbers? The second, and that's again what I want to place it, one thing which has not come up is audio content, podcast, because we want to be audio first, creating that. And how is, if video itself is difficult, And audio, the cost of production is much lower, which is why we want to look at Pickle Jar podcast. But how are we looking at funding that piece?
All right, so let's break that into two. Nilesh, do you want to address the audio podcast question?
No, the video.
The video question. All right.
We are a video first company. I'm an audio first person. We struggled with precisely the same question, where if you're creating great video content but aren't getting satisfactory reach, because now they count many, many zeros before it becomes satisfactory. And we have taken a conscious decision to work as a platform for some things and work as a production house for other things. And we're very happy to, give our content to other platforms, partners, brands, whatever. And because otherwise we'll never be able to beat the big numbers that are being achieved with acquired reach or bought reach and all of it. We cannot fight that battle. But we can create great content. So rather than just moping about it, I think we should just also half our work can be becoming production houses for others.
On the matter of we can create great refreshing stories, but reach, how do you push it? And why is pushing so expensive?
Did you want me to talk about that or audio? Both. Okay. So first I think the last year and a half or so, the fundamental shift in the entire ecosystem has been the cost of data access and smartphones. And I think video fundamentally beats everything else, right? From a perspective of ease of just usage, right? So millions, the last 200 odd million users are basically coming in and principally using video first. There is definitely the whole story that can be through audio. I'm sure it will be there, but it will be a definitely niche kind of thing compared to where video will be, and video is today already. Now on distribution, again, I'm not sure whether that's a solve that we are here to give distribution. We are here to help you reach the kind of customers who want to find you. We are the platform. I think there is a misstatement here, right? Set of expectations here that our responsibility is to be able to push out and publish out to everybody. Your content is published by you, and the content is searched and viewed and becomes interesting when it's interesting to a lot of people. So I think it's quality of content that really gets the right distribution. Emotional stories, right?
I'll just
fundamentally have been very, very interesting.
Right?
Audio को niche ना कहें आप?
आपकी आवाज.
No, but this question, okay, so you did say that it's not technically your responsibility, but I think if I would be, what you were talking about is the money that people spend on pushing their content onto the timelines of users, and it is expensive, and then it becomes a wheel, basically. You spend money to push, you get the views and the readership, and that brings you the revenue.
Organic doesn't work after that.
Yeah.
Organic gets stuck at that
Just
point.
a quick response. I think like if your say your USP or your excellence is in the space of content creation, I think the sensible thing, at least when you begin with, would be to piggyback on a platform that has the ability to distribute. Actually, like you could either collaborate with a bigger media house and all. I think like a lot of players have evolved out of being like a niche content provider to a. Of course, I mean the commercial. Yeah, of course the commercials are. Would be challenging.
And, being a news portal is a brutal marketplace. I think we should have Dhanya's comment on some of where is Dhanya? If she's in the room still, but I don't think she's honestly.
Right. So, but do either of you want to comment on this? This whole, and you mentioned it as well. The idea of paying to push, and then your basically organic movement doesn't happen anymore. Is that a good way to start?
That's a fact. I don't think there's any. I mean, everybody's had that experience, right? If you dare to pay and push, then after that, organic is never going to work for you. So,
sorry.
Yeah. So I think, we've never paid finally. So I think the point to this is, when it's good content and you kind of, I think what Nilesh said is you have to build partnerships. You have to start figuring out how to, distribute your content, not so much in the, free for all, your content will work kind of a situation, but more see where your audience is and find partnerships which work with your audiences.
So I need to explain. There was a partnership in place, but it's not a partnership that lasts forever. The big dilemma for a content creator, particularly at least in the regional space, like I was saying, we were putting it out in Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam, and English, of course, was that you have a partnership which is like a project related. It's not, then the question becomes that do you become a portal and enter that the brutal space, or you operate as a production house? So in this case, like Nilesh said, Pickle Jar has been as a production house, first doing things for the Wire, the News Minute, next time for the Daily Hunt. But then this is not really a long-term solution that you're looking at, and particularly even for audio, there is no advertisement which is going to make it sustainable. Now, these are questions, and I was in the podcast panel, and I could, audience there, and people were grappling with the same issues. So partnerships are certainly in place. I don't think we can even underwrite some of our travel into those rural places. We can see that people are pretty loyal to your question or to this thing. Certainly there was no doubt about the quality of content. There were people who were following it who could find absolute value, both from India and abroad, who were saying. But then beyond a point, how do you reach those large numbers which channels have access to?
So there's something that I've been meaning to propose for some time, and this seems like a good platform to do that. I think a large number of independent content creators, media platforms, should actually create one platform of their own. A website, for example, where I could get Pickle Jar as well as Gaon Connection, because the aggregated reach is good enough, will be good enough. The sales can happen on behalf of everybody, and the revenues can be split on the basis of everybody's reach. It's fairly transparent. So then it's just like if there is a 5-person sales team, I don't have to hire a 5-person sales team. Those are costs also shared with everybody. We are mostly not competing for audiences. I'm not competing with News Laundry or The Scroll, but we are all fighting the same battles.
But Nilesh, that was actually the promise of aggregators, if you really look at the original idea, which eventually is the cannibalization part that you spoke about.
No, I'm saying when you click on it, you will go to my platform. That's the difference. That's the difference. Yeah.
Nilesh, I welcome you to partner with us to get you started.
Across, in the US now there's another momentum which people are building vertical media, and they are building their audience through very low-hanging old workhorses called email and SMSs, because one, you own them. You own these two very typical, so you build it over a period of time.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of news, I think Bloomberg does this, Bloomberg Quint does it, where they API, they send you 3 WhatsApp messages or 4 WhatsApp messages a day with links to specific stories. You have to subscribe to that model. I'm not really sure how much money they're being paid per user, but it is a subscription method.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. At the end of the day, when you build it and you build your niche, loyal customers, it's not a matter of, like, I keep going back and saying, it's not a matter of the millions. You have to figure out what is your niche, your loyal customer base. And if they are your loyal customers, we have to make them get accustomed to the fact that they need to pay for it. Subscription has to be what it is, because, good journalism costs, like we discussed it. So it has to pay. And, once people get used to paying, they will pay. It's just a matter of the fact that nobody is willing to take that step. Though I think with the current economy that's happening, from the big guys to the small guys, everybody needs to get it paid now at this point. So I think we're reaching that tipping point where everybody decides, listen, we need paywalls in place, we need subscriptions. And I think people are understanding that also slowly, because, again, connectivity is better, payment methodologies are better. When we started a paywall for some of our products some 10, 12 years ago, it was ridiculous because there was no good payment, mechanisms in place. So that, people were willing to pay, but they could not pay properly. It was just a pain to do it. But now there's so many things that have become easier. It's just a matter of pushing it forward a bit.
I think also from a now that television is traditional media, from a traditional media point of view, both print and TV, you had to up until now survive on a mixture of subscription on print, which barely paid for anything, but it existed. People pay something for their newspapers and something for their cable connection and advertising. And I think going forward, at least the news producers who are confident about their content are going to have to increase the portion that comes from subscription. If you're confident, like we said on the panel, that you're putting out good content and you have a loyal viewership/readership, then subscription will have to become a larger chunk of that pie, because you cannot entirely depend on advertising. And I think the other thing we must talk about is what happens to journalism that depends on advertising. Whether that advertising is coming from the private sector or it's coming from the public sector, what kind of pressure that puts on the system, on the reporters, on the editors, because that's your sole bread and butter and you don't have the...
I think on that advertising model, I think there's, just to give you a quick number, if you, let's take Anglosphere publication like Economist is generally considered a gold standard, and they had like 39% of their revenues coming from advertising as late as 2012, and today it's just 11%, while their subscription is like almost more than 50% of their business. So I think it's taken for granted, or I think the fundamental operating assumption needs to be that the ad-led model is on its way out, or maybe it has to be done differently. So I think it's the readership revenue which has come back in a big way.
I'll also agree with Nilesh on the partnership point of view. So for example, we do, on Mirror Now, we do a lot of work in the area of women's safety. We do a lot of work in the area of education, health, spaces that we've occupied that were left unoccupied by other traditional media. And again, that allows us to then do work that we would have done anyway. This is, anyway, like for example, the LGBTQ rights space is something that we would do anyway. It's not outside of our comfort zone. We're not doing anything that makes us uncomfortable. At some level, I think that every journalist is having to ask and answer these questions on a regular basis.
Yeah, and
we had one young lady right at the back who put her hand up. Yes, go ahead.
It's been such a long discussion that I forgot my question, but yeah.
We'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah. Okay.
Long form is back.
Yeah. Shifting from advertising video on demand to subscription video on demand, I think it's a very complex process, because if you see the mass, 1 billion people, out of which 70% of the rural population doesn't even earn 5,000 a month. And I think Nilesh sir would know this, that if he is going out and creating content for rural India and having his apps based largely in rural India, he would know that his app would not work if it is on a subscription model. Correct me if I'm wrong. So in this age, how do you, now I think the advertising, online revenue advertising laws are also reforming so much that YouTube, Facebook, any other OTT, Hotstar also has news, MX Player also has news. All these will earn lesser. Publisher will also get a portion, and audience will also get its content, but on an advertising model only. So yeah, now you guys are open to debate.
But I think, and the timeout board has already come up, and this will be the last answer. But I think that effectively what we've arrived at is that every business and every news producer, content producer needs to figure out what works for you based on who your audience is, based on what your content is, and who you're catering to. And sometimes more often than not, you have to be willing to pivot and change based on the market as well. But Nilesh, go ahead.
No, I think it's a misnomer that rural audiences are not sort of in a position to pay. Our weekly edition costs 5 rupees. And in 7 years, no one has ever told us that it's too expensive, because they pay for Maggi, they pay for all kinds of fast food, they pay far greater. So that's not a problem. Secondly, we are creating content, video content for an entire population that is now used to watching high quality video content. They will watch the same Kalin Bhaiya, right? So you can no longer offer them content that is rooted in the Doordarshan era. So, and they're mindful, they're aware. So what we are trying to do is can you talk to your audience with a sense of equality, not talking down? And can you still give them the quality that they are used to from other much, much bigger platforms? That's the sort of battle for us.
All right, we have run out of time. I saw you. We're going to wrap this up here, but I can see more hands come up, so it would be really nice if you guys could hang out and continue to chat after the panel is over as well. You've been excellent. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks.